Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out for today. I want to welcome back to the program Melissa Gira Grant. She's a staff writer at the New Republic and has written a piece, Conservatives Plan to Ban Abortion and Cut LGBT Rights Starting Next January. Melissa, welcome back to the program. We're talking about Project 2025. Mm-hmm. And not to mention a rival magazine, but American Prospect had a day one agenda, like long-term piece that they had done. They had talked about for Joe Biden, what it was in his authority to do, et cetera, et cetera. This is sort of like that, except by the entire Republican Party apparatus, as opposed to a magazine. Walk us through. And so this is something that's going to happen if Donald Trump gets elected. This is not an advocacy document. This is literally a blueprint. Just first, let's start with who wrote this and who are the players in it, because this is like I don't know. It's like the super group, as it were, of conservatives.
Yeah. And since I filed the piece, it's grown. So when I filed the piece, it was close to 90 groups. Now we're up over 100 groups. And to your point of this is going to happen, this entire project, think about it as what they wish they had in January 2017 when Trump entered office.
Yes.
This is supposed to be something you can deploy on day one. So you have all the right staff in place to make everything that Trump wants to happen and the right wants to happen. There's no incompetence here. The effort is led by the Heritage Foundation. They have done documents like this before, going back to the Reagan years. This is a little bit different in that they're also recruiting personnel. So they're running a portal online where people can apply to essentially join the next conservative administration, which of course will be Trump. They're not talking about it as if it will be Trump, but it will be Trump. I can't imagine anyone else would run with this. They are a super group, yes. Groups folks might be familiar with from this coalition behind Project 2025 would include Alliance Defending Freedom, who overturned Roe versus Wade, who has another major case before the Supreme Court right now about the abortion pill mifepristone, trying to roll back access to that. And as you go through the document, you can see that some of these things are actually also already in progress. So some of the arguments that Alliance Defending Freedom is making at the Supreme Court next month are mirrored in this document. So there's no secret plan here, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This is all out in the open. You can go and download this for yourself from Heritage Foundation's website. Some of it will be very familiar if you've been following the attacks on abortion rights and on queer and trans rights in particular. And it's quite extreme. I don't know if you want to go down through some of the specific
I do, but I want to just state because there really is two elements to this. I think this story. One is how incredibly extreme it is, but the other is what you've suggested about what they would have wanted in 2017. I mean, people forget no one thought that Donald Trump was going to win. I don't think the Republicans thought that Donald Trump was going to win. The Democrats certainly didn't think that Donald Trump was going to win in the general election. I didn't think that he was going to win in the general election. People thought that just, he's going to happen and they'll pass and then they'll be the opposition party. So there was nobody who was doing a game plan. And I think, back if there were people doing a document like this with Mitt Romney, they wouldn't feel like they had full license to do what they wanted to do. But this is the sort of that combination of we're getting ready to implement this stuff and we're going to have full license. I mean, Donald Trump grabbed the Heritage Foundation list of judges and he did it in the way that somebody would grab a grocery list and take it. I mean, he got every one of those things there. So people have to understand this is not, like you say, about being a secret plan. This is about something that is so almost fully corporatized, but then so radical and extreme on the other side. Heritage Foundation is probably I don't know, would you say like the sort of like primary think tank in the conservative Republican movement?
I would say that, yeah. And there are, other groups that they work hand in hand with, like you mentioned, the judges, the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo are kind of common elements, with them. Also, Leonard Leo is funding many of the top groups, or his various dark money funds, I should say, are funding many of the top groups involved in Project 2025. So, like, as
he got donated $1 billion, right? I mean, didn't Leonard Leo
he got like the largest single donation anyone has got from any cause in United States history, and he has been parceling that out through various dark money groups, through PACs, where it's really hard to sort of figure out where it's coming from. But we do know where some of it's coming from that major gift, and we can track it through these various orgs, and it's just slush money all over Project 2025. Like, I don't know, they would be in a very different position if they didn't have access to those resources.
So, all right, let's walk us through some of the lowlights that are in this, because it really, and you really are looking at this. I mean, like you say, this is a 900-page document. So, somebody could go through this with a lens of various, regulations in certain industries and approaches to civil rights or to other things. You really took a lens to this of like sort of almost like the theocratic, sussing out the theocratic, really. I mean, I think ultimately it comes from like a theocracy, but it filters its way through sort of patriarchy and then sort of like some type of gender the wars that they're waging. But walk us through some of the lowlights here.
Sure. So there's like 4 guiding principles in this document. I started with number 1, which is a whole set of policies that are supposed to enshrine the family, by which they mean a traditional one man married to one woman with their own biological children. They are that specific. So already they've abandoned same-sex marriage. That's gone. They're trying to roll that back. That's beginning of the document. We're going to say this is the only group that is the family. And now everything that we're fighting for is about them, purportedly. What they want to do to sort of reinforce that family is like cutting all kinds of social programs, number 1. Like I looked at health and human services and education, but somebody could do a version of this that looks at housing or looks at what they want to do with the Justice Department. What they're doing to the Department of Education, in addition to just saying it shouldn't exist, like that's one piece, but they're not going to get that, maybe. They go through and they talk about kind of this parental rights concept, which I think people may have come across in some of the various projects of these right-wing groups. And it's also, as you pointed out, this is the Christian nationalist project. So it's also about we as sort of the chosen people of God, we're ordained to rule in this way. And so when they talk about parental rights, they mean parental rights insofar as they align with them. There are no parental rights, for example, for the parents of trans kids, like Next Benedict, right, who died as a result of what looks like an anti-trans attack in a public school. A lot of the policies in place in that school are, the ones on bathroom use that prevent trans students from using the correct bathroom, from playing on sports teams, and then also just this general sort of political climate that casts doubt on trans people generally. They want to take that and bring it to the entire country with this report.
And I want to get fairly specific in terms of their mechanisms, because when you say right now, let's just start with marriage equality and we'll work our way down, because, if you have a, Oklahoma ban on trans kids using bathrooms that are associated with their gender identity, that's something that they would impose on a federal level, and they would try and roll back some of these civil rights legislation or the way that they are prosecuted. In the same way, during the Obama administration sent out a letter and said, just a reminder, trans kids can use the bathrooms that are associated with their gender. Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration could send out a letter like, hey, don't worry, we've reinterpreted the way that this legislation works, and you're fine to dictate. But let's say like on marriage equality, like how would they, since the Supreme Court, how would they try and roll this back? Would it be in a, like, do they have like a list of regulations or laws or subsidiary laws, like, rules that would begin to strip the rights associated with marriage for people who are of the same sex?
They're really coming for the 14th Amendment when it comes to things like same-sex marriage, but also a host of issues, whether we're talking about abortion, other kinds of reproductive health care, the issues that folks are facing in schools around gender identity and having their access to bathrooms and sports limited based on, their gender as assigned at birth. They see, and you can see this in Clarence Thomas's concurrence in Dobbs, where he sort of like signposts what this theory is, that the 14th Amendment, as it has been interpreted to give us a right to privacy, right? And that's the engine of Obergefell and same-sex marriage. That's the engine of loving, right? Which got us an end to bans on interracial marriage. It got us to Griswold, which is what legalized birth control for everyone. They're trying to chip away at that and essentially say that we don't have that privacy right when it comes to our sexuality, when it comes to our gender, when it comes to our families. So they already have the judges in place also to give them that. So I think it's a very real fear. The other piece of it is that they're looking to some very archaic laws that we just have not taken off the books to advance this agenda. They want to instruct the president to instruct his Department of Justice to enforce these laws that have not been enforced for more than a century. The key one there is the Comstock Act, which was, originally conceived of as an anti-obscenity law. But if you think of what was obscene in 1873 when it was passed, it includes everything from, porn, yes, of course, sex toys, but contraception and the mailing of any instrument that could cause an abortion. So they weren't thinking about mifepristone in 1873. Right. But that's what these groups behind this Project 2025 plan are thinking about now. So they day one want the next president, Trump, to begin enforcement of the Comstock Act. Some of that legal theory is before the Supreme Court right now, but they're essentially saying, like, we don't need to wait for the courts. If we get the right guy in office, he can just start forcing enforcement of this. And I mean, it would be chaos. It would be complete chaos. But I think part of what's going on here, too, is like instilling fear in people of, the consequences. Like violating the Comstock Act can come with a prison term. It's not that they're going to be able to arrest everyone who mails mifepristone, but they're going to create an environment where people are too scared to do it because now something is being enforced that wasn't before.
This is analogous to saying we're going to have a series of exceptions in which you can get an abortion, but we're going to make it so that you can't really assess whether you fall within that exception. And so if you're a doctor and you're looking at the penalty of prison or certain losing your license, you begin to I don't want to say censor, but edit your behavior in this instance because you're afraid. You don't know where the law is. You don't know whether you will be prosecuted. And that's what's happening there with that. Take us to the next step that next sort of like pillar that you were talking about.
Sure. I mean, in addition to, wanting to erode the protections of the 14th Amendment, in addition to wanting to enforce archaic laws, they also want to get involved in further regulation and punishment for organizations and individuals who don't conform to this plan. What's a concrete example of that? They want to strip the words reproductive health, reproductive rights, abortion from all government documents. It's impossible to do. But what it does mean is if you are, say, a public health organization that gets US funding, now there's this hammer hanging over you. Are you going to take the word abortion out of everything that you use government money to do? there's like kind of two prongs here. Like one is like, let's erode protections, and then let's like really heavily police people. And they're using systems that are supposed to, like PEPFAR, for example, it's an engine for HIV/AIDS funding. It's an incredibly successful program, but they essentially want to say you can't actually do any PEPFAR programming if it mentions sexuality or sexual orientation or gender. You can't do HIV/AIDS education unless you emphasize abstinence. Some of this is like things that might be familiar from the Bush years.
Yep.
But they're doing it in a different context where I think they have much more support within the Republican Party for doing things that maybe the Republican Party would have thought of as kind of marginal and not that important. But by connecting them to this like kind of vision, which frankly reminds me of, the 14 words of the neo-Nazi party. This is all about protecting these imaginary children, often presumed to be white children, of the future. And with the specter of like protecting that child, they're able to do everything from expose kids to violence in schools to end HIV funding around the world if it doesn't comport with this worldview.
And again, the other aspect that they're doing is not only articulating these principles, but they are going out and regardless of, I remember when they were doing this for the CPA in Iraq, they didn't necessarily find the most adept people, but it seems like the quality of personnel you need to carry out this is much lower, frankly, than if you were to insert them and try and rebuild a society that had been bombed out. They're just going in there, and half of all they need to do, it seems to me, or even 3/4, is just to wreck stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's a wrecking ball that they're handing them to in this document, right? Like, don't think about the justifications for what you're doing. Don't point to any specific policy. You just use what we've already given you. And now you go out and carry this out. And, that could require everything from, civil servants posts that are supposed to be apolitical. Like one of the things they want to be able to do is to have many, many, many more political appointees carrying that out, those functions, so that ensures that somebody could have more control over who is in those roles, who would be carrying out this plan. They need everybody from the head of Department of Health and Human Services to the grant admins, within the State Department doing HIV funding. It's a top-down approach, but they need people all up and down the chain who are on board ideologically. And that will be the primary litmus test for who they put in place as well. You can see that from the kind of recruitment efforts that they're doing, asking people about, essentially when they got red pilled, without using that word, show us your social media profiles. Are there only 2 genders? How do you feel about illegals? There's nothing policy based there at all. It's purely far right vibes. And do you
right? There's no criteria or qualifications outside of these are ideological purity tests. All right. Lastly, like you mentioned, like this is part of their recruiting. Do you have a sense of like where they are in their recruiting? Like how are they doing intake? How many are there? And, and part of what you're saying about like all these questions and the social media profiles is so that the people listening to the show can't go and clog up their mechanism. They have now a machine to make sure that they're getting the people who, by the entire, follow TPUSA, I guess,
right.
On road trips and,
they're
the
still
first
going to
ones
have
to
to
buy the
weed people
CPAC
out.
tickets.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they're
But
still
how
going
are
to
they
have
doing it? How are they doing it? And do you have a sense of like, how far along are they? Like, are they putting people into a pool? Are they saying like, what do they do with those people? How do they keep them on ice until like the fall?
That I don't know, sort of like what holding pattern they're in. I know that they were doing recruitment online with like a Google form, which yes, conceivably anybody could fill out that Google form with whatever they want and send it on over to the Heritage Foundation. They were doing some recruitment in Iowa in alignment with presidential campaigning. That seemed honestly to be more about being a presence, right? Like we're marketing this thing that we're doing. I don't necessarily think they thought there were like ripe recruits for them at the Iowa State Fair, but maybe I could be wrong. I mean, they are just sort of casting the widest possible net here. What I have heard in terms of numbers, and I don't know for certain, you know, they're not disclosing how well they're doing. But it seems like their numbers are not what they wanted them to be, that they were looking, you know, upwards around like 50,000 people to pull this off, and their recruitment has only gotten them several thousand. So, you know, on that level, it might be that there are just people who are way more content to post online about these things than actually sign up to go to Washington and carry them out.
I guess it remains to be seen. I'm not too optimistic about that yet, because you're 9 months out from a job that you don't know if you're necessarily going to have. And maybe it picks up steam as we get closer to the election. And then I also got to imagine, like, the demo that they have to sort of thread the needle. We need to find young people, because it's going to be young people, right? I mean, it's people in their 20s and their 30s who are going to be applying for for a lot of these jobs. And they also have to be lunatics who have like ideologies that were, you know, better suited for the 1500s than today. But I would imagine that's a bit of their challenge.
I mean, I'm thinking of like what CPAC looked like over the weekend, right? And imagining like who attending CPAC would be like in the bag for this kind of plan. And it could be as likely like the 20 and 30-year-old Nazis who were being allowed in. Some great reporting in The Nation has shown, you know, they were kicking out progressive journalists, but allowing avowed neo-Nazis to come into CPAC. So if that's, you know, wherever that exists and whatever even is the mainstream of the Republican Party right now, I can imagine that they could find enough people to at least have seats filled.
Right.
But I also have to imagine that there's a behind the scenes effort going on at the much higher levels, right? Like of the kind of cabinet level positions. If you look at the people who wrote various parts of Project 2025, you do have, you know, former DHS, former HHS, like Dan Severino, wrote the health section. There is some overlap with some Trump administration figures that they also are probably going to try to get back on board.
I would imagine. I imagine it goes both ways too, where it's, you know, they're seen as a way to get into the administration. Melissa Gira Grant, we will link to your piece in the New Republic, conservatives plan to ban abortion, cut LGBT rights starting next January. Really appreciate you coming on and walking us through this.
Great, thanks.